Right, we have reached that magic moment. It's time to do some masking tape design. So in this module, I'm going to go through creating my design and give you all of my essential tips for getting a really good result, laying out your design and painting it in. And then in the following module, we'll go into more specific design techniques that you can use alongside the masking tape designing. So I've obviously already started with my painted sections, which has given me the starting sort of shape for the design that I'm going to start to lay out on top. What I do need to do though is continue the markings that I made when I set this out onto the top so that I can follow those. Really, I've just been using my T-square to find the centre points of each door and between that sort of the drawer as well, so that I can get a line from top to bottom that is completely level, so that I can use that to angle my chevrons to make sure that they all line up perfectly. So I just ended up measuring, basically, creating little marks with my chalk. And then the great thing about T-square is it actually, you can put it onto a flat surface to get a perfect right angle and make sure that your lines are straight. So I just need to let's try and work out how to do that. So I'm just going to measure across to here and then divide it in two. Same sort of technique that you'd use to create diamonds. Find the centre points, link them up. Very simple but effective, and a really good way of balancing designs across a piece because they fit perfectly to the dimensions. So putting a little mark there. The good thing about chalk is chalk will actually wipe off, whereas if you use pencil you can dent the wood and it doesn't come off paint very easily. So chalk is my go-to, and the dressmaker's chalk is quite narrow as opposed to kids' chalk, which is quite blunt. Let's try and get that lined up. Make sure it lines up with the bottom as well. Oh, not quite in the right place there. There we go. Okay. It looks about right. And then make sure these are all lined up. Just going off a bit at the top there, but that's why it's good to stay in front of your piece so that you can really check that things are lined up properly. Just a little bit. Wow. My design doesn't go all the way to the top actually. We're going to go probably to about here, so that there's black here, and then I'll do whitewash from that bit up. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to start getting some of the taping on, getting the colour on, and then when I take that off, I'm going to stand back and decide. So I'll start to bring this black up through it, so you get a faded out effect, and then start to bring the white down. So there's a little bit of iterative sort of practice here. I'm going to do a bit, stand back and have a look at it. Very often when I do a design, the tape goes on all in one go. I paint it in, take the tape off, and it's done. This one, I'm going to sort of see what the overall effect is as I go. So it's a bit of sort of planning ahead, breaking your design down into components. If you've got two colours right next to each other, you are going to have to tape twice, at least twice, because say I was going to paint this white here, I would have to have tape on top of the black to paint that white. So I would have to do it sequentially. I couldn't do them all at the same time. If you've got more spaced out designs, like fine line designs that you might have seen that I've done, or stripes, you can put the tape down all in one go because you've got gaps between, so it's much, much easier to work with. So have a little bit of a think about how you can break it down into stages. So as I said, mine's going to be a combination. That's why I'm doing it in sort of different sort of sets. So first of all, I want to start to get my tape into this space and start to fill that up and fill it up with all the different colours that I'm going to put on mine. So I'm going to be using, now I mostly use the frog tape delicate surfaces for my designs. I've talked about before about how it's good on the delicate surface of stripped wood and on painted surfaces. This is the go-to, the low tack version. But I'm also going to be using as well as that, a tape brand called Tamiya, which is a little mini masking tape, effectively, used for model craft. So you could use it to sort of create stripes and things on Airfix models. And so that will work really well with the frog tape to create narrower stripes, narrower bands, because although we can create fine lines with frog tape, what we can't do is create fine spaces between lines, so we need to use a narrower tape for that. So I'm going to actually mix these up in this design, and it's going to be quite sort of varied, but it's a bit freestyle actually. I've got an idea of where I'm going. It does this zigzag shape, but I'm going to use the tape at different widths of it, and sort of play around and get some nice interplays of tape and see how it feels really. And then because it's a rainbow effect, I'll take the colours up the piece and sort of gauge it as I go. So I'll start at the bottom with this one. Let's decide which bit of tape I'm going to put down first. I've got 6mm, what's that, 3mm and 2, and obviously the 24 of the frog tape. So I think we'll do 3. I'm going to do a really fine band first where the wood is. I'm going to mask off along the edge of this. So I'm really just freestyling this. I am trying to visualise what it might look like when the tape comes off. This is a bit of the art of it. So I'm just going to outline this. And what that's going to do is leave me a little strip of wood where that sits. Let's get that off. And then start to build up another layer. So what I'll do is put down slightly wider tape. What should we go for? Go for the next thickness. This is the 6mm. And what I'm going to do is leave a gap where I'm going to put paint. So what I mask off is obviously going to be wood. So I want a specific size gap. Let's just go for... So I'm going to take a little piece of tape, almost like use it as a guide, like a spacer. I'm just going to pop that in there and then use that to help me make sure that the width is consistent all the way down. You could just put another piece of tape in, but of course that tape's then going to not be so sticky when you pull it off, and you've just effectively wasted it. So I just use a little piece to check the width as I go down. Let's just take that off. It is much easier to take the tape off the roll so you can work with it. Put that down there. Get down low enough. Just get a fresh piece. This is probably the fiddliest bit because it's quite low down on the piece, but obviously as I get higher up it'll get easier. Okay, sure that that's exactly right actually. As you can see, you can actually take the tape back off and reposition it. You can do that 2 or 3 times, but then after that I'd probably get a fresh piece of tape so that you make sure that it's stuck properly. So I just keep building up these widths of tape. So I'm just going to continue that on up the other side, do the same thing. So again, just inside the paint line so that I get a little sliver of thin stripe of wood. And then get the slightly wider one. Again, take a little piece of tape, use that as our guide. You do get quite used to using judgment, but with the smaller widths it is a bit more challenging. Oh. Okay. Now I'm just going to check at the bottom that where they overlap makes a perfect little square, so that I know that that is symmetrical, and also that the centre point here lines up with my line. I need all of those centre points of the chevrons to line up so it's symmetrical. So let's just... I'm just going to put my line back in. Just rubbed it off a little bit. And when you keep all of these parallel and the gaps the same, they do tend to stack up symmetrically, but it's a really good idea to have a line or something to help you guide your eye. And you could just use a stick of wood, or if you haven't got a large ruler, you can even use a plumb line. Just tie something to a piece of string and just check that that is central. So that looks good. So all I need to do now is cut away this little bit of tape here, and that's going to leave me with a perfect channel to put my first stripe in. So I'm just going to push it down a little bit there, and then I'm going to use a really small clear ruler and a craft knife, and this one's got a straight pointed blade. It needs to be really sharp, because what we don't want to do is dig too hard into the wood. We also don't want to get a sort of fluffy cut. We want a nice clean cut, but we want to be able to do it quite lightly. So I just line that up along the tape. It doesn't matter if it goes into the wood a little bit, because there's going to be paint in there afterwards. And then take the other side off, line it up again. You can use a metal ruler, but I just find it a bit easier to see what I'm doing and get a really good cut. Just lift that bit of tape up so I can get that piece off. And your cuts have to be really accurate with masking tape design. Paint will find its way into any deviation of cuts, so if you don't quite line them up or there's a bit of tape sticking out, it'll show. So you've got to get really close up, double check that everything's lined up perfectly. So that's the first chevron on. I'm going to start building up more and more in this section, but I'm going to vary the tapes that I'm using. But then I'm going to sort of bring in a little bit of a signature style, which is to break that and alternate, instead of having sort of the paint going from one side to the other, is actually having it stopping in the middle. I'll just show you doing one of those as I'm going. I'm just going to put some wider tape in, which will give me a bigger space, so I'll end up with more wood, but then I can also end up with a bigger gap to put more paint in, so I can have broader chevrons in there. You can actually obviously vary up the size of the gaps, and if I wanted to do it that way, see that? And then create that chevron over here, it's really easy just to create your own spacer by putting a piece of tape in the gap and cutting that out. Oops, not quite lined up. And then that would allow me to move that piece of tape. Okay, I've got quite short nails at the moment. That's upcycling for you. And I can move it over here and replicate the same space. And then pop a piece of tape in over here. Making sure again that my centre points all line up with one another. So you can do that again with the ruler. Just to check So where I've got little bits where it just doesn't quite line up, I often just smooth them with my nail so that I know that I'm going to get a wobbly line when I paint it. And sometimes even the little bits where they overlap, I just sort of pull them back a little bit because they can still show up as well. And then what I can do now is start to mess about and alternate things. So I'm just going to put my ruler down the middle and split that. And then I can start to take one side away, and I've just put that in, but get the idea. And then I can put in different widths. Right, let's get some paint on, because obviously this is going to take me quite a bit longer just to develop the rest of the design up the front. What we're going to end up with is this sort of rainbow effect. So these stripes here will probably be a violet colour, perhaps even into the indigo here. But just to show you how I would paint something in. And what I'm going to do, because this is quite a narrow strip of tape, very easy for me to paint on the black, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to just put some masking tape down, give myself a bit more space. You can see that I've split the tapes between the drawers so I can pull them forward. And that allows me to paint off the top. You could actually mask across these edges if you wanted to. Mine's still rough and unpainted, so I'm not too worried because I can always sand it. But you might want to mask that completely. That's the only thing about narrow tapes, is that when you're painting you have to be quite careful, and then as you paint the tapes disappear underneath the paint, so by the second or third round it can be quite difficult to see. So don't go too crazy with lots and lots of narrow tapes all at once. It's better to do less lines and keep filling in, coming back to it, because otherwise it can be quite difficult to tell where the lines are, as I know from doing quite narrow stripy patterns before. Out of the way. Okay. And a really important thing now is to go round and to rub the tape down really well. You can probably see there actually where the tape that I've put on here is stuck in areas better than others by the fact that when you rub it harder it goes darker. So it's quite easy to tell with frog tape, perhaps less so with the narrow tape. The narrow tape isn't quite as foolproof as the frog tape, so just give it a really good rub. That friction helps to seal the edges. Now I've got quite a coarse grain here, which can mean that paint sort of disappears under the tape and can bleed into the grain. So there's a couple of things you can do if you've got a similar grain like that. Is you can seal the edges of the tape with a watered down top coat, just basically a clear coat, the kind of thing you're going to use at the end anyway, and that will give you a nice crisp edge. Or if you've got a painted surface, you could just use the base colour, which will seal the tape, and then put your design colour on top. So a couple of things you can do to make sure. So if you've got a textured surface, open grain, slightly bumpy surface, it's a good idea to seal your tape first. But I'm just going to go for it because I've got quite a textured paint actually. So because it's metallic, it's not as thin and runny as other kinds of paint, so it shouldn't seep under the tape. So I'm just going to go for it. So I'm making sure it's all rubbed down well, really paying attention to where it goes around the edges. Getting it rubbed in with your nail, and also where it overlaps. So I don't have any overlaps, I do, yeah. Is really get your nail in and make sure that it's pressed down well. So I'm going to use a small square artist brush, sort of the same size as the stripes really. And because this is metallic and it's such a little pot, I'm actually going to use it straight out, I'm not going to decant it. I don't have it open for that long. And the key thing I'm doing when I'm applying it, which I think also helps to avoid bleed through, is actually I'll paint along the lines of the tape first. So even if I was painting in a shape like this, I would paint along the line of the tape first, and that helps to seal it, and then you might then fill it in. Obviously with a stripe it's a little bit easier, but I don't tend to go with the grain when I'm doing stripes, I go down the way. So I always try and keep my brush strokes going in one direction with metallics as well, so that they can reflect evenly, not backwards and forwards. So this is going to take a couple of coats to get to full coverage. The good thing about doing this way is that I can also make sure I don't get too much build-up of paint along the edge of the tape, so you don't end up with a ridge. More so when you're starting to add more paint on the second and third layer, quite important. So effectively sort of cleaning out the edge of the tape and not getting, so if you pushing it towards the tape, you can get bleed through, but also you're going to end up with a ridge of paint. If you do find it builds up between coats, you can also use like a synthetic sanding pad just to knock it back, not on the last coat, but in between, and that can just keep that nice thin paint layer. Okay, so that's 3 coats, dry to the touch. I always take the tape off when it's dry, when the paint's all dried. I think you get a better cut as the tape pulls through the paint. You don't get a mess when pulling it off either. So the key thing though is to do it steadily and fairly gently, and not ripping at it. Sort of pull it in the back over itself. And yeah, like I say, fairly gently. What we don't want to do is rip too much of that wood, given that it's, vintage veneer. So just being careful with it. If you do get any little tiny bleeds and little bits of paint that peek through, really easy to fix, and I'll show you how to sort those out right at the end when we do our finishing touches. It's not a cause for concern. These things happen and we can easily fix them up. See, it's just pulled a little tiny bit of the wood there because it's going across the way. So I can just fix that up, take that off and paint that back in. But overall, it's a pretty good effect. You can see the little bits of the wood that has pulled up. That's why a delicate tape is a must. Okay. Oh, not sure what happened with that bit. There you go, I've gone over my line a little bit there, so I can easily sort that out, a little bit of sandpaper, clean that up. But that's what happens when you've got narrow tape. It's quite easy to go over it. I think I've done it there as well. But really easy to fix that up. Either I'll catch it on the next bit that I paint in, or I can just use a little bit of sandpaper and just take that off. Ready to add the rest of the colours in. Let's get that last bit of tape on. I'll just show you how I get a straight line. Even when you've got to go over little elements like that, sort of edges, this is a beveled edging on one of the doors, because it's quite easy for your tape line to go off a little bit of a funny angle. So the best way to keep it straight is like so. What I'm going to do is matching it up on my lines over here, like I've been doing. Just get the angle right. And then, obviously I can use my piece of tape here. I'm just going to eyeball it actually to keep that same width. There, up there. But obviously I could use that little bit of tape just to match it. But what I've done is stick it at the top, stick it at the bottom, and let it go straight over the top of that obstruction effectively. So you've got the line. Don't push it down either side because it starts to then go off at a different angle. And then what I do, so this works equally well if you're going from, say, one drawer to another drawer that's higher up, angle it across both, stick it down, and then cut. Like so, I'll show you. So I'll just cut it, then stick it down, and then we keep that continuous line. Like so, so then everything lines up. I just then need to do something about that gap before I start to paint. So I'll infill that with a little bit of tape all the way down, just to make sure I don't end up with paint in those gaps. But that's the best way to get that line nice and straight. Piece of small tape, if I can get it. And just take that along the edge of the tape that I've cut, pushing it in then with my nail so that it stops paint going in there. I don't need to cover the whole of this because I'm only painting on one side of it. So I only need to reinforce effectively the edges where I'm painting. And it's only where I've cut the tape that I need to do this. So I'll just get rid of that. And then what I'm actually going to do, so I need to do that all the way down there. I actually need to cut the doors apart. Cut these bits off here. I mean, by all means, you can leave it on and paint it like that, but as you can see, some of the tape here is not sort of adhering properly. There's sort of gaps here. So I actually like to cut that apart, take the doors off, and then I can paint it much more smoothly instead of having to go around these things. That's my preferred thing, is put the doors on to do the design, take them back off. I do often sometimes paint with it up like this if I'm doing a video, so you might see me doing that, but you can get a better effect. You just need to be really careful to make sure that you paint the same colours going across areas where they go from sort of top to bottom. So just make sure you put a little marker so you know which is which before you take them off. But it can be much easier to get a nicer effect if you take everything apart again. So I need to go around and cut all of these. And actually what I'm contemplating doing is taking my design over those edges and round the side. So I will leave those tapes in place just like this on the edges, so that I can use those as a guide to lead me around. Just going to cut all those and just see if I can cut these apart. You just want to burnish the edges, really. Use it with your finger. You can use something else to do it, but I just use my fingertips, making sure everything's sticking down well. Okay, so that's all of the edges, I've just put some extra tape to take it round, just to stop the paint sneaking anywhere. You can also mask off the edges to give yourself a nice crisp end to each line. I'm just going to be really careful and lift my brush up as I come off, but you can do that. You could tape it up all the way around here. Now I'm going to leave mine in place for the sake of doing the video. You need to obviously see what I'm doing, so I'm not going to put it down flat to work on. But what I will do, now that I've loosened all that tape, is pull the drawers forward so I can get a nice brush stroke up without obviously hitting anything else. Same along the sides here. So I'm actually going to leave the drawers in place just for the purpose of demoing it. And I'll just put some masking tape down the side there. Just where the stripes are, I don't need to go over here because I'm not doing anything with that. So I'll just put that in there, try and get it in the gap so that I don't make a mess. So, ideal situation would be to take it off, I think, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to work with it in situ. So you can decide what works best for you. Trying to get that around the corner. You could actually open the door and feed it through the gap, so you don't end up with any paint on the frame. I think this will work for the purpose of what I'm doing. And then I'll just need to cut it around the hinge. Cut. And then I'll just put a little bit of tape over the hinge itself, because I've got two lines that go into it. You can see why it's actually just easier. In some instances, if your screws are replaced, like I've replaced mine, just easier to whiz it off. So that should do us, I think. I'm going to spend a bit of extra time now, because then it's less fixing up after. Just going to go around that as well, and then I can swing the door out to paint these ones, so I don't need to worry too much. Just that corner there. So what I'm going to do now, the little test bit was pretty good actually. Didn't get much leakage at all. But there's a lot more pattern here. And as I said, fixing all that up, any little errors that sort of sneak through, big job. So I'm actually going to put a clear coat over the top of it, just to seal the edges of the tape. That means that that's the thing that will bleed underneath if it's going to happen, but it will seal the edges of the tape, so whatever colour I put underneath cannot get under the tape. So the clear coat will go underneath, but that's fine, because the rest of it's going to get that anyway. So it'll just disappear into the final clear coat that goes over the top. What I can do here, if I'm doing the black areas, is use black paint here instead of clear coat, because I don't want to seal the paint just yet. So I'm going to put black over the top of that, or whatever base colour you've got, and then that will seal the edge of the tape. The bleed through will be the same colour as the base, and you can paint away, happy in the knowledge that it's going to be nice and crisp when you take it off. So I'm just using my regular top coat with about 10% of water in it, maybe a little bit more, but it's just, I want it quite thinned out. It'll wet the tape, it'll absorb into the wood, but it won't leave the surface shiny for my paint layer to go over, because I don't want anything too shiny. I need my paint to be able to stick well, so this will still leave the wood with quite a rough feel, so the paint grabs hold nicely. And it'll dry really quickly. So as soon as it's touch dry, I will start to paint.